Terrans are weak creatures. They have one redeeming quality. Long ago they were persistence hunters, and evolution has not yet succeeded in stripping them of this quality. They can sustain movement for hours or days without suffering severe consequences, due to several specific adaptations. Foremost among them is the ability to sweat through a mostly hairless hide. An inelegant solution, but unarguably effective among the number of cooling solutions available to creatures across the stars. Additionally, their muscular skeletal system is built on a tough yet flexible endoskeleton surrounded by heavy muscle that provides impressive shock resistance and dense energy storage. Redundant organ systems ensure a high toxicity tolerance and notable immune response to foreign pathogens. An overclocked metabolism and hyperactive scar tissue, ugly but effective, ensures that injuries heal quickly. Durable, they are. Very durable. Had the circumstances of their introduction to the greater galactic community been different, Terran would have been eagerly snatched up to fill the ranks of manual labour required for industrial mining operations throughout every system. A respectable job, and necessary to fuel the ever-hungry Maw with raw materials to manufacture civilization among the stars. For those operations that strip ore along the Outer Rim or in the Baronies, however, far from the corporate watchdogs that ensure civilization remains at least halfway civil, the job is often better than outright slavery, only in name. Because Terrans are weak creatures, and the weak will be exploited by the strong in the never-ending cycle that has remained unbroken since the second species beat the first over the head with a rock. Evolution exacts steep costs for such high trauma resistance and rapid injury recovery. Their overclocked metabolism demands massive amounts of energy, which, in a kind of cruel irony, is inefficiently dumped in a significant percentage as waste heat, especially on such a warm world. They need a lot of oxygen too, again on a low-oxy world. Their homeworld itself seems against them. Though every dominant species is uniquely suited to their birthplace, Terra is no longer the same world the Terran evolved upon. Their mismanagement has only exacerbated the cascading environmental and ecological failures that compound upon their surface in the centuries since their industrial evolution. Without access to hyperlanes into the greater galactic community, Terran tech advancements could not, and would never outstrip the slow insidiousness of climate change and ecological collapse. Like every other dead world discovered, lack of access to convenient jump points leaves too many holes in a species' understanding of physics to ever outscience their own self-destruction. Weak creatures, unable to overcome their base nature to survive within the context of the galactic stage. They reach for the stars, of course. Every species does. But the punishing gravity of their world imposed almost insurmountable escape velocity, limiting them to archaic chemical propellants. And when they touched the very edge of the void, they found nothing. A barren moon and a dead planet they had neither the skill nor the patience to terraform. The Terran would soon have joined the graveyards of star-locked species that litter the void. Trillions of creatures born far from accessible jump points that might have found their place within the galactic community, except for the unfortunate accident of the location of their birth worlds. We discovered them when a deep void research and reconnaissance probe stumbled upon a radio transmission. It happens within the incomprehensible enormity of the void. There are processes, procedures, and codes of ethics ratified through all the core worlds. We turned our sensor arrays towards the source and waited. When the electromagnetic radiation finally traveled the distance, it revealed no significant tech, just orbiting satellites and rudimentary hapdomes on their moon and closest planet. Just weak creatures trapped upon their dead-end world. Or creatures wise enough to hide, with the foresight and capability to begin to do so, because the weak will be exploited by the strong in the never-ending cycle. This far from the hyperlanes, we were surely the first potential for interspecies contact. There were debates, weighed odds, calculated expense of resources against possible benefits, and transmissions back to our highest commanders. And when the course of Terran history was decided for them, we began the monumental process of first contact. At best, we would acquire a symbiotic species. At worst, with events turned hostile, the expanse of light years would see the Terran lives spent by orders of magnitude before they could cross the distance back to our homeworlds. All reward, no risk, and between those two extremes, possibilities. The appearance of 2 capital ships and a torpedo frigate on the boundary of their system caused the Terran world to panic with a burst of unshielded electromagnetic radiation and a flurry of clumsy orbital satellites. Our drone screens reported from their positions almost 1 trillion clicks out, defenseless. We deployed into the world's far orbit and secured the advance of our transports and supply barges. Our science teams landed on the surface under gunship's overwatch. The Terran came to meet us soon after, in vehicles powered by internal combustion engines. They were smaller than us, as most species that grew up under such gravity, but their harsh world had gifted them no other benefits usually given to high-grav creatures. No fangs, no claws, no armored hide. Only 5 senses and an internal skeletal structure that left vulnerable organs exposed. A weak species that could counter our readiness for orbital bombardment with nothing but archaic nuclear warheads. Our translation software was useless in that first meeting, so we joined them in drawing pictures in the dirt. They offered us water. We gave them trinkets. Although the journey had been a waste, we held no hostility for them. The void is littered with the remains of star-locked species. Deep void explorers had found their remnants before, and we would find many more. The Terran came out to meet us again as we prepared to leave. We sent a detachment to them as we embarked, and waited impatiently for whatever formalities of a farewell were to be had. The detachment rushed back. Plans for launch were cancelled. Info was tight-beamed back to command through bleeding-edge comm protocols. Queries from High Command subtly pinged core records soon after. One of the Terrans had a hide that was the black of carbon scoring after energy cannon impact. It took time and effort as we waited for the comm signals to bounce back, but we persevered, feeding swaths of Terran speech into our translation software, as our linguists laboured to understand. Because this was not 2 dominant species that shared a homeworld, a discovery rare and meaningful enough that it would call for a fully funded joint expedition from the core worlds, but simply another Terran, another of the same species. The same as the others, just pigmentation of his hide to better protect from the climate of his ancestors. After much trial and error, we finally communicated to the Terran that we wished to take blood samples. They agreed when they understood. We sequenced the DNA and confirmed what we suspected. What could lead to more value than every mining operation we owned across the galaxies? Genetic variation is a rare thing throughout the void. Species grow up on their world and are uniquely suited to it. Nature is slow, but it works unerringly to fit creatures more and more perfectly into their niches, through everything from mass extinction to microevolution. A species as young as the Terran had such potential to be shaped. We began to understand each other, exponentially faster as our linguists deciphered more and more of our respective languages. They had differences within their species that would have astonished core xenobiologists. Big, small, short, tall, a degree of variability that does not exist but in rare worlds elsewhere. And it was not just that. They could adapt to their environment on a timescale measured in weeks of their star and lunar cycles of their moon. Not the many lifetimes nature usually took. Those who spent time in higher altitudes developed more efficient cardiopulmonary systems. Those who lived in the heat survived it better, as did those who dwelt in the cold. Skin rubbed raw grew back thicker and harder. Terran's stress response is so high that it has been observed to even harm itself in its efforts to adapt. The Terran was weak, but we could make them strong. We saw how they could stress muscle and bone, how fast they could become stronger, quicker, more skilled, how they could improve reaction time and power production. And when Terrans' bodies stopped responding to increased stress, they had drugs that allowed them to push far beyond natural boundaries. Their children were even more impressive. Traumatized and damaged brain structures could recover without observable ill effects. It was incredible. we can make them better. We abandoned our plans to return to our deep void research. Our homeworlds queried the core for any mention of the Sol system. We learned of their Human Genome Project and their research into the fields of epigenetics and gene editing. It was primitive, pathetic. We offered to help. And help we did. It took a long time. Understanding an unknown species on an uncharted world in a system that isn't on any star map on record is nigh impossible. But we kept at it with a tenacity. We started untangling the strings, cracking the cipher. Illnesses began to decline. Disease mortality rates were decreased by almost a quarter. Cancer stymied our progress for a while. Habitable worlds are rarely bathed in such an amount of radiation, and the disease, like the Terran, was variable to an extreme degree. The core bounced comms back across the void to our homeworlds. An answer to the queries. The Sol system did not appear in any database. Undiscovered void space. We drove Terran biology harder and harder, diving ever deeper into their DNA, RNA, gene sequences, and epigenetic expression. We had blood and tissue samples from every significant civilian population on Terra, archived every malady they faced. The data showed us everything we needed to know. Then came the first casualty. We pleaded for forgiveness, promised to re-examine our procedures, submitted reports to ethics committees and independent auditors, continued, analyzed, understood, and when the second Terran died, reinforced. Terran DNA was cluttered and messy, filled with complicated, intertwined sequences that resisted being teased apart like they had consciousness of their own. It was as variable as the species it formed, but the evolutionary junkyard lent itself well to modifications. To gene splicing and virally delivered editing packages. To integration into our own DNA soon in the future. Very soon in the future. We are born and we die as we are. Not clones, just the same species. Imagine if we could change. If we could become stronger and quicker. If we could adapt in fractions of our lifetimes to become specialized. To become more. Imagine the applications throughout the core. The scientific advancements. The influence. The Terran protested. We told them it was for the greater good. The needs of the many outweighed the deaths of many. Terrans stormed one of our research facilities, stole our subjects, burned our data, killed 6 of our own. We disarmed the population. Those who tried to fight were obliterated with orbital strikes. Guerrilla warfare and terrorism was met with harsher suppression. Curfews, prison, execution. Because the Terran were the weak, and we were the strong. The never-ending cycle. If one was to live, another must die. We were in the source code then, the deepest possible level of the Terran genetics. We understood everything there was to know. When we completed the final stages of the live trials for our new genetic programs, we would have all the answers to make our final play within the core. Because we were strong. A species confined to their world's surface does not contend with a void-spanning civilization. When this world was mined out like a cracked asteroid, we began to load our carriers and supply barges for extraction. We had enough. We had everything we wanted. Time to abandon ship. Leave this species starlocked and eating itself beyond the edge of the black. This far out, it'd be a miracle if explorers even found Terran fossils. A few of us got sick in the early days of preparing to depart. Every world has its share of hostile bacteria, viruses and fungus. Those of us who travel the void have long ago had to solve the problems of immune systems that must learn to fight a completely new host of illnesses. We were not much concerned. We had the sum total knowledge of Terran medtech stored in databanks, ready for transport back to our homeworlds. But for all our knowledge, we had not seen sickness like this before. Ours didn't heal. They got worse. Then more were sick, and then more. And then the first case was reported in our orbiting fleets. Then another, as the long incubation time and asymptomatic carriers spread it throughout our ships before we realized what we were facing. It had been tailored for us, understand? Built on the foundation of a disease Terra had eradicated long ago. Sequenced through the medtech we had developed during our research. Stolen and repurposed against us. We could have defeated it, maybe, if we had known in the early days what we were against. But coordinated rebellion sapped our resources and focus, and it was soon too late. It killed Terrans too. Millions of them. They fought us as their eyes blackened from hemorrhaging circulatory systems. A nightmare. But billions lived because their genetic variation kept them resistant to a custom-built sickness. All of us who suffered contact got sick. Many of the Terrans got sick, but not all. A few didn't get sick at all because of the redundancy built into their genetic makeup by their world. The world that seemed itself to be against them, but proved, in the end, to be their ally. Because the Terrans are durable. A few of us, still capable of it, limped out of the system, leaving behind the fruits of our labour, along with our dead and dying. But crippled engines and cracked hulls are slow, and Terran, roused to war, move quickly. Because the Terran are strong, and we were. I fear I shall die out here, with the last remnants of my species on the edge of the black. We cannot return to our homeworlds, for the Terran have ploughed over the fields and salted the surface. And if the core were to learn what we did out there in the dark, we are trapped, and they are coming. They have one redeeming quality. They are persistence hunters. They remember it now. They remember how to hunt again. But instead of a primitive species early in their evolutionary lifetime, they now stalk the void with tech and knowledge they wrested from us. I hear things. Whispers in the dark. Terror is delving the deep. They are coming with rocks to bash the first species over the head. Except now, the rocks are of tungsten and depleted uranium. They are coming to satisfy the cycle.